I can't walk away from this conversation without at least checking in on what y'all's thoughts are about what porn can be used for. Like, what is it good for?
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of application, but, honestly, I wanna go back just for a second in
Sure.
answering your question to the conversation we had earlier about couples, right?
Mm,
We talk a lot about couples and porn in terms of, is one of the partners typically, like, stereotypically the male, right, consuming porn, and how does the female feel about it? But porn I think can be very, very useful as a couple's tool, right? Both to
mhm.
communicate about sex, to examine or explore sex, determine what they like or don't like, to
Yes.
have discussions. So you're discussing something that someone else is doing on a screen, which separates you from your own kink and it makes it a little bit easier to talk about. Like, hey, do you like what they're doing on the screen? And how does that make you feel? And then you can kind of feel out like how you communicate off of that. Or it could just plain old be something that couples just enjoy together to either get things started or just as a fun sexual pastime. So I wanted to throw that out there first because I know there's a lot of other applications for porn, but we talked so much earlier about couples and how porn can be destructive in a relationship, and I think
Mm,
there's a lot of ways where it can be constructive.
so much. And almost used as a marital aid, what they would call,
Sure.
vibrators sometimes. And so, I mean, it just, performing for many, many, many years, I can tell you that I have gotten lots of emails from the male side of a couple who is just like, my wife loves you. We watch you together. It like watching you together has made our relationship stronger. I mean, I've gotten tons of emails like that. And so I think it's like especially when we allow for that sort of freedom of exploration with our relationships, and not being judgmental of our partners when they maybe ask
Mhm.
about trying things like this. It can really like elevate what you have. And so I think application in that sense, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Definitely.
no question. And it doesn't need to just be limited to sort of that traditional notion of quote pornography or the
Right.
video clips of what 3 to 12 minutes that are usually populating the front loading page of whatever website happens to be yours.
Streaming
Uh,
side.
because there are so many things that couples can explore together through different forms of erotic art and through erotic media.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit before the show about that stereotype of uh, the man in a cishet relationship that is always like sneaking off and has that problematic relationship with porn, or whose partner has a problem with their relationship with porn, and like the
Mhm.
tension and the notions of shrillness and everything that goes into that. But there is the corollary of that stereotype, which is the relationship where the man is always begging, like, please will you watch porn with me, please will you watch porn with me, and
Mm,
the woman who perhaps wants to be sex positive or at least like cool or chill, but really is not enjoying or comfortable with anything that they're seeing on the front page of Pornhub. Like, to that couple, I really want to stress that there are so many remarkable products out there,
yes.
again, outside of Pornhub, like some of this more
Yes.
artistic erotic audio or small studio
Mhm.
or these dime store novels. Like, that's where these more niche or alternative forms of pornographic media can be really valuable.
Yeah, and I think too that there's something to be said for that good giving and game.
Sure.
Maybe not 100% of the time do I want to do this position that I know you love, but I'm going to do this position that I know you love like every
Right.
once in a while because I feel turned on and happy when I see my partner being turned on and happy. You know what I mean? And so I think we need to make some space for that. So maybe like be open to giving porn a chance if you have that partner who's just like, please will you do this with me, like have some openness to do something to make your partner happy, and then see if maybe you can find something that you're okay with. But even in the end, if you try it and you're just like, honestly this just doesn't do it for me, then maybe it's something you do every few months to make your partner happy. Not 100% of the time, but just being a little less, rigid about
Sure.
these things. It can add so much to your relationship and your communication overall and your health.
Yeah.
One
And I
thing
mean,
one thing
if
that I
there's
think
something you are allergic to, like it's very acceptable
right.
to say we're not going to have that in the house. If
Yeah,
if I'm going to go into anaphylactic shock every time somebody brings a kitten into the house, then we're just not going to compromise on not having a pet. We're
right.
just not going to
Right.
have one. At the
Yeah,
same time, if it's just a preference, if it's I prefer not to eat a lot of Chinese food, I much prefer Italian food or Mexican food, then yeah, I think we need to make a little bit of space for each other from time to time.
yeah.
But I think that, and this is where I agree, but I'm gonna offer a little bit of pushback in terms
Sure.
of knowing the other person's um history and relationship with sex and with porn.
Oh,
Because there could
trauma.
be a valid yeah, there could be valid reasons why the woman or the man, like depending on who the partner is that's being asked to do the watching, there could be something there that there might be a reason for them, whether it's
Well,
a
that's sort of the
trauma or
allergy that I mean. If there is
yeah, I
something
just
that
want to
will
make
like
that
send
Exactly.
you into
clear.
anaphylactic
Yeah.
shock, then yeah, I think it's acceptable to say like maybe you
We're
go
not gonna
and
do it.
eat that with somebody else or on the weekends, but don't, bring it home to me or don't do anything that's going to cause me that danger.
But
Totally.
then I would also go so far as to say the advice that I would personally give that individual is don't be afraid to explore your own relationship with this topic, right? So,
Right,
like
sure.
maybe the husband shouldn't be like, "Well, you need to get over it and you need to work through this and we need to make this, not a problem anymore." But the woman or the other like the person who has the problem being able to say, "Well, why is this a problem and is this something I can
Yes,
solve? Is it just a preference or is there actually a trauma or a trigger there that I really do need to deal with?" Because when you
exactly.
just let those triggers run the relationship,
And
it's
just
amazing
pile
how
up.
many problems are gonna, yeah, develop. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
so that's the thing too, question where that is coming from and be like,
Mhm.
maybe I need to try some therapy to deal with this. But of course, I think everyone should. But yeah, and I think that's an important point too, of course.
Sure. Well, just in the interest of time, I want to kind of hit on, I suppose, a few other ways or uses or purposes for pornography. I mean, we kind of vaguely mentioned the idea of exploring new kinks. I think that there's real value in the opportunity to use sexual material to sort of slow down your relationship with sexuality. Rather than just coming to a immediate climax, actually having a prolonged erotic experience and giving yourself a like meaningful, maybe even if we want to use that kind of scary word, spiritual experience of your body. I think that there's a lot to be said for that, whether we're talking about audio or video or any of these other things. Is there anything else that comes to mind for y'all about why porn can be useful or what it could be useful for?
I mean, aside from the super obvious, like it's just enjoyable for the person, right? Like, I mean, that's the most obvious and kind of like cliche answer is like people just like it. Like, why do I enjoy dramas or love stories or romance novels, right? Like some things just boil down to enjoyment. But I think one thing that we haven't really touched on that I think is poignant for a lot of couples, a lot of individuals, is to be able to explore a side of yourself. Like we talk about exploring, like learning, but we might already know what our desires are and it might be difficult to attain those desires, whether
Yeah.
it's um a certain sexual combination of genders that maybe you just like so maybe you prefer women over men but you don't have a girlfriend at the time or there's nobody available to you and you're kind of like wanting that sexual release but don't have the real life partner. There could also be like situations that are really hard to foster, like maybe they can be fostered occasionally, maybe they can't be fostered at all. And
Hmm.
so to have that porn there as it's kind of a band-aid in the sense that it's not the real thing, but there are times where it could cover or round out a person's sexual experiences because there's limitations in real life.
Totally. And like when you said that about the limitations, it's like I know and have created tons of giantess porn.
Hmm.
That is something that unfortunately you will never be able to access in real life. But with the use of GoPros and some green screen, special effects, things like that, you can live out those erotic fantasies through visual media, and get that itch scratched. And so I think, just agree totally. And it's nice, or even like if you have a partner who's just, maybe you talked about BDSM and you were like, I love to try this, but they're allergic to it because of trauma or whatever else.
Hmm.
And they're just like, this is a big, hard no for me. Well, then hopefully they would be okay with you at least looking at some of it, but getting that kind of release, from enjoying it visually and still being able to play in that space a little bit, even if it's alone, that can just be so fulfilling. So I think it's important for that too. And I know that especially all of us porn performers really are always wanting to stress that we are not sex educators, that porn should not be
Mm.
used to learn about how to have sex. But I think that if it's really depending on a lot of the creators, where you're getting it. Again, the front page of Pornhub is not the archive of a lot of thoughtful, useful types of
Sure.
pornography. It's kind of like lowest common denominator stuff. But if you find independent creators that you maybe like there can be something to learn from that. I think, if I'm going to just like toot my own little horn here a little bit, I think that definitely, if you're maybe a younger like lesbian and you know that you feel you want to be with other girls, but you're just kind of scared and confused and don't know where to start. Like, I think
Hmm.
watching some of the stuff that I made, which I can almost guarantee you will never be on the front page of Pornhub, but like could be very useful in that sense. But it is a fine line, and you have to be really careful with that. And that could lead to so many more conversations about sex education and how I think that parents need to talk to their children about porn.
Sure.
It is out there. They're
Yes.
going to see it. So you have to have
Yep.
that conversation. Um, and, you shouldn't be looking at the front page of Pornhub and think if you're a young gentleman and you think that, oh, this is how I have sex with women, by choking them and spitting in their face, like that's a problem. But there are some things to be learned, depend if you can find the right stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, and not to mention, you talked about sex that you may not be able to have for yourself right now. And
Mhm.
Laura, you talked about how that might just be not where your life is at right now. And Sin, you mentioned that it might not even be like possible right now. But I think it's also worth recognizing that pornographic media is just different from real life human sex. And
Mhm.
there are so many different ways to explore things that you couldn't experience in partnered sex, whether we're talking about like the altered state of hypnotic media, for instance,
Mhm.
or talking about some of these like simulated role plays and ASMR, and like all of these different kinds of things can be unique experiences that are valid in their own right. So
And valuable to have.
yeah, exactly. So, knowing that we're getting close to the end of the show, we've got a few more calls on the line. I wanted to see if either of you could recommend or share.
Educate ourselves and spice things up a bit in terms of our conversation, and that I found actually really, really, not to say you were just saying porn is not educational. It was very educational.
No, but
Yeah,
But it
it
was
is.
educational for
well, and
consenting adults who knew about sex and
Yes.
do
just
we
helped
want to
us to get the
call it
conversation
or
going.
do we want to call it porn when you are watching a very erotic and explicit how-to instructional informational video? Like
Yeah.
when my partner and I watch a YouTube tutorial on like how to give a massage or something like that, it
Mm.
is not inherently erotic. But if we are watching a video on some other website that is about the exact same thing, but now there is a lot of nudity and maybe it is a little bit more nasty than all of that. Is it somehow porn now? Like, is it still instructional? Like, what if it's a how to peg somebody? What if it is a how
Mhm.
to have like healthy, safe, enjoyable anal sex? Is that instructional? Is that pornographic? Like, there's so much more to quote pornography than Pornhub. And I know we keep saying that, but
Absolutely.
I don't know that we can ever say it too much the way our culture doesn't seem to recognize it.
Yes. I don't think we can say it too much. Keep saying it.
All right. Yeah. Anything else that y'all want to add before Laura jumps back on the phones?
Oh, well, quickly, like my
Please.
response to that question was
Yes,
that
yes.
so I have been involved in creating video porn for 20 years. So sometimes I think people are a little surprised to hear that I don't watch it. They're like, "Who's your favorite porn star?" I'm just like, me. Like
I like it.
I'm not. It doesn't do anything for me to watch porn, but what does do something for me are these. I got my first one when I went to my very first AVN convention in 2003 from a kinky company that was there, and it's a color book and it's a comic book, and the illustrator, I will shout him out, his name is Gary Roberts, and it's the way that he draws the characters. So there are a lot of comics like this, and a lot of these comics that I like, so they are non-consensual.
Mm-hmm.
But that like gets me wet, because fantasies can live in my mind
Yeah.
and they can be fucking awesome. Doesn't mean I want reality to happen like that unless it's a setup, consensual non-consent.
Right.
But
Still a fantasy.
yeah, it's a fantasy. And so the way that he draws the women are all very attractive and cute. And the men are generally like, the bodies look kind of nice. The faces are covered most of the time, which is totally part of my fantasy. And some other artists who draw the same kind of stuff, it really turns me off because they make sure that the men are really gross looking and the girls are complaining about how nasty they smell and stuff. And I'm just like instantly turned off. But something about Gary Roberts understands that women have these fantasies a lot. And it's almost like he writes catered to the female consumer of what he makes. And so I got several of his just like actual print copies of what he does. And so I don't use that a lot, but like when I do, I just know that it's going to work for me immediately. So
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, there's
yeah.
something about sensuality in art that you almost don't even need like the video, and you don't need the proverbial Playboy pinup picture, right? Like there are
Mhm.
ways to do sensuality. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about that, like, oh, I have another one. I have another one. Because for me, I'm really, really into fantasy art. And it
Yeah.
can be entirely non-sexual, but the way a person is positioned, their clothes, the look in their eyes, even,
Sure.
or how two characters might be looking at each other, even if they're not touching, can be very erotic. And so it's interesting how visual arts can just be done in a way that's so sensual.
Mm-hmm.